Okay, so it appears as though we're actually live. Everything should be working out, I think. Just double checking it on my phone before we really jump into things here. I don't know. Okay, so yeah, it seems like we are all good to go, so I'm just going to leave that stuff aside so I can actually see what the heck is going on in the live stream. Somehow I have to find the chat. I don't know how to do that. Somewhere in here. Oh, there we go. Okay, well that's maybe I'll use that instead. All right. I apologize. Excuse my novice nature. There we go. Okay, now I can see the chat. We're all good. So we're going to be starting with the paddle this morning. So I've got this book. It's The Complete Guide to Making Your Own Paddle. A really interesting read because it goes over basically everything you could ever want to know about how to make all the different types of paddles. You know, there's everything from your North American style paddles to your South American style paddles to your paddles that came from Asia, even from Europe, all over Russia. You know, there's no matter where you go in the world, a paddle is kind of one of the most common. I don't want that playing in the background because I'm just listening to myself. A paddle is one of the most common things you'll see, in traditional cultures because, as humans advanced, we all had to go from walking everywhere to finding some mode of transportation. So waterways are a very common thing all around the world, and it just kind of made sense to hop in a boat, carve a stick to push yourself along. So the fact that paddles are where they are today is actually a really interesting thing. And so when I say that there's literally hundreds of different designs of paddles, just in this book alone, it's got some of the more common styles that you see, like, I don't know, there's some of that classic beaver tail, otter tail, well, a lot of stuff with different animal tails. But what we're going to be doing in this one is carving an otter tail. So the nice thing about this book is that if we go to the very back here, it's got all the detailed layout instructions for how to set up the actual paddle blade, which is one of the hardest things to get right when you're making a paddle. The paddles that I've made in the past have all kind of, I just kind of guessed at the sizes. And so the nice thing here is that if I find the one that I want, Algonquin, otter tail. Okay, so yeah, we want to be doing an otter tail here. So an otter tail is basically a longer blade. So I believe that this is the one. Yeah, so it makes it a little bit quieter. It's meant for like going in rivers, deep rivers and lakes and stuff like that. Compared to like a shorter style paddle, that is more so meant to for like whitewater rapid and stuff. Stuff where you don't want to be hitting the bottom of the river. Whereas the otter tail is meant for like nice, deep, long strokes that can it just gives you a little bit more power. And honestly, it's just one of the coolest looking patterns in my opinion. It tapers out really interestingly. So we've got all of our layout instructions here for the blade itself, but we don't actually get to know what we need to do up here. So the thing that I've always been taught about sizing a paddle is that when you put it on your toe, it should basically reach up to your chin. And in some cases, you want the paddles to be a little bit longer. So in this case, this blank basically sitting on my toe goes just over my chin. So a little bit, it might be a little bit of a taller paddle, but there's nothing really wrong with that either. Lets me get a good idea of what I'm doing here. So since I'm 6 feet tall, this blank is about 64 inches long, so I figure that should be more than enough length to give me a paddle that'll work for me. So the most important thing here, the most important thing here is going to be getting our layout lines set up as accurately as possible. So probably all we're going to really achieve in today's live stream is getting everything laid out so we know exactly what we're doing. That way when we come back next Sunday, we can actually start cutting down some of the shapes and doing a lot of our bulk removal, which we're going to be doing all that with hand tools. It's not going to be going over to the bandsaw or anything like that. So that's going to be kind of interesting. But all I want to get done today is just get the layout. Because the interesting thing about the way that this book provides the layout instructions is that they're all in 32nds of an inch increments. So when you have to do a ton of math, it's a very, very confusing thing. I've had to sit down and do the math, calculate it out on a sheet. I don't know what I did with my calculations. I left them somewhere. So all I need to do first off, though, is just mark in a center line on this board, because we just need to know where the center line is going to be. It also doesn't really matter, it doesn't really matter where it is, to say the least, but it does you need something to work off of here. Because on this blank that I have, none of these edges are square to each other. This isn't a milled piece of wood. I just took a slice off of a 5/4 board on the bandsaw, and we're just kind of left with a random board. So our edges are not perfectly parallel. Nothing here. This isn't a milled piece of wood whatsoever. It's just a blank of wood that we're going to start working from. So we're going to quickly take a measurement in here. And yeah, so our blank at the top there is about 5 3/4, and then we're just a little over 5 3/4 at the bottom. So it's pretty close. So then we want to take our 5 3/4, divide that by 2 for 2 7/8. And then those of you that actually watch the weekly videos, or the daily videos I'm putting up, you'll know that I was using this thing as a straight edge for doing some hand planing recently. So this one edge on it is already nice and straightened out. So we are going to reference things more so off of this side rather than the other side, just because I know that is a fairly straight edge to follow. There we go. So now we just need to actually draw in that straight line there, and I think I'm going to grab one of the pieces from the bed frame to use as a straight edge on here. That should be more than long enough. Clamp that down, please. That wants to move around a lot on me. Okay. So now we should have a good center line on here. I know that this board is mostly straight because I put it over my jointer, and that's about as good as I'm going to get. If our paddle has a little bit of a curve to it in the end, it's really not that big of a deal. Again, this is not, it's not like I'm making this paddle to sell. I just want to kind of get into doing some paddle making because it seems like a fun thing to do, honestly. It's one of those things where you can kind of just not use any power tools because it's a small enough project that, well, there's not a ton of material to remove anyway. And so the only thing that really matters here is that where we put the blade is going to have a big effect on how the paddle comes out. Because obviously this board has this big knot section right at the top here. We got a decent sized knot. And if we put that blade down on this end here, we're going to run right into that knot. Whereas if we put it on the other end, it's going to be pretty strong. Also, we want to make sure we're watching out for the grain structure of the wood. So we can see that down here we've got a pretty good straight grain structure, and then all the way up the center section where our line is running, we have really, really straight grain. So that's one of the things that I found is supposed to be really important with the paddle, is that if you don't have that good straight grain in there, it's not going to be, you're gonna try to paddle with it and the neck is just going to snap. So it's one of the things you have to watch out for if you're interested in making your own paddles, is that, you check for that grain structure. It's kind of like anything where you're working with spindles. If you've ever done turning on the lathe, spindle making, chair making especially, that'll teach you a good lesson about, using straight grain wood. It's one of those things that is a very interesting lesson to learn as you get more involved in the woodworking area. How are we doing over here? All right. Hey, we actually have, I'm surprised. I wasn't actually expecting anyone to stop by. So those of you guys that are watching, I do appreciate you being here. It's a nice small show right now, but thank you for taking the time to stop on by. So I'm just going to lock this in place using a stop there, and then I've got this Veritas bench dog stop that I'm going to use on the other end. I don't want this thing sliding around on me while I'm trying to draw on it, so we're just going to hopefully lock it in place pretty securely here. Alright, that's not going anywhere. So I'm going to swap the other camera on here. So that should give you guys a little bit of a better idea of what we're doing. Yeah, that's pretty good. That should work. Alright, and so now that we have our center line in there, all we need to do to actually start laying this out is just follow the numbers in the book. So you can see that we've got this whole chart here of all these different numbers, so it's a specific position. So we've got the y-axis, which is our center line, and then we've got our x-axis, which is our width. And then our width is only a half width of the paddle. So we're going to go from our center line, measure out 1 and 1/13. I've got to recheck how these measurements work because it is very confusing on how it actually. The math here is very weird, but I believe it's 1 and then 13/32, 2, like down when you get down here, it's like 2 and 22/32. So it's all, I believe that's how it works, but I will double check that here real quick. Yeah, so the first number, so it goes, so there's a number slash another number, and then all that means is that we have we're going 1 inch and then whatever 30 seconds. So 0 and 1/30 seconds, yada 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 yada. Oh, I hope that camera comes back on. No, it is confused. Okay, so we'll just stick with the webcam for now until the other one decides to do what it wants to do. Oh, come on, wake up there, bud. Okay, so it looks like we're sticking with the webcam for now because my Canon camera is being a little bit of a nuisance. Yeah, that should be enough. So yeah, now we just have to go through using a fairly accurate ruler, something that has 30 seconds of an inch. You want to go through and actually lay out all these lines now. And I need to move the camera back over so you guys can see what I'm actually doing here. I tried to set up the live stream. I tried to do everything as foolproof as I could. But yeah, that Canon camera, it doesn't work very well for this whole webcam live streaming part of things. So I need to find a better solution at some point in time if I'm going to keep on doing this. But yeah, for now, I will just keep moving the Logitech webcam around to try and get it in a position where you guys can actually see what's going on, because I think that would be really boring if you can't actually see what I'm doing here and all you do is get to see my face. So I'm going to move the camera back over and I'll show you guys kind of as I lay out the lines here. It's also a horribly narrow field of view on this camera. Wow. Apparently I just cannot turn off the Canon camera. It gets bad. It gets very mad at me if I accidentally turn it off. Anyway, so we know that at 0... wait, no, I know that's... Again, this is horribly confusing. So 0.16, so at ½ inch up, I would guess is what that means anyway. So we're taking a measurement at a ½ inch up, and going all the way up to 29. And so they do kind of taper interestingly. So we're starting at a ½ inch, going up to 1, 2, 4, 6. And so we will start jumping pretty significantly in size once we start getting up to the wider section of the blade here. And so what is kind of interesting about this whole paddle carving thing is I very much so thought that, I know that there's different sizes of paddles, but I didn't know that your blade would stay a standard size amongst all your different lengths, and it's only the actual shaft of the handle that will ever change length. So it's just one of those things that is kind of an interesting thing to learn about paddles, is that there is actually some standardization to them. So now, like I said, we have the fun of doing math. So on our first mark here at a ½ inch, we need to go out 1 and 13/32. So I need to find my, there we go. And now we just get to do a lot of counting and math. And I'm sure having a sharp pencil is probably a useful thing here. So I mean, the best thing to mark the best way to think about marking these out, because we're dealing with all kinds of weird numbers in the 30 seconds values, you want to start by just knowing that a ½ inch is 16/32. So if I know, so in this case I'm going for 1 and 13/32. So I know if I go to a ½ inch and then I count down 3, that is going to get me where I need to be. So it's just one of those things that I've picked up over a little while of having done this, is that you got to keep those like quick references in your mind. It's really annoying. I really hate the imperial system, but basically everything I've ever known is set up in the imperial system, so I can't really get out of it. And so what each one of these is going to do is just give us a reference guide of how to draw out our paddle eventually. And you can see how narrow this blade is actually going to end up being. We're not even using the full 5 3/4 width here. This is going to be a very, very narrow blade, but that's exactly what you want in a paddle like this, is you want a fairly narrow blade that just slices through the water and can give you a little bit of propulsion. And the most important thing here is that obviously this doesn't have to be like precision accuracy. You know, every measurement has to be absolutely perfect. You just want to be close enough. Like it really, you know, one of the things that kind of put me off doing the paddle for a while was I didn't know if I would have the the patience to go through and lay all this stuff out and mark it all super accurately. But again, then I watched a few videos about people saying it's one of those things that once you do it, it just kind of starts to come, you just kind of start to understand it. Whereas if you never try to do it, then it's forever going to seem like a daunting task. But it really is not something that is impossible to figure out. But I do have to say that if this was in metric, it would be a lot easier numbers rather than having to count small ticks. Two and 25, 30 seconds. Oh gosh, the bloody imperial system. Plus, my eyes are not very good. As you can probably assume by the fact that I wear pretty thick glasses, yeah, it makes reading all these little ticks really, really annoying. Let's see how we're doing. All right. Okay, so now we're finally at the point where we're starting to taper back up. So from the bottom of our blade, we've kind of gone out to the sides here. Now we've reached the point where we're going to start coming back up and forming the shaft. What you'll see is that this is it. In this area, it's going to be very drastic curves to it. So we went from 2 and 23 30 seconds to 2 and 15 30 seconds. Now we're dropping down by basically another half inch, and it's overall it's a much faster, much steeper curvature at the top of the blade here. then we finish off at a 1/2 inch, which seems very narrow for what is supposed to be our handle, but makes sense in some cases. We might cheat a little bit and actually make our handle just a little bit thicker. But I mean, I guess a 1/2 inch round should be a pretty good size for a handle. Yeah, I don't know about that one. But now all we have to do is just kind of connect the dots, make ourselves a nice smooth line on both sides, so that we actually can see what lines we need to follow. Then what we'll do is we'll flip the board around and actually draw out the handle. I don't actually get, from this book, I don't get any kind of handle drawing things. You know, I don't have like the whole scale of charts. But we do have some kind of rough ideas of, you know, there's some samples of how to carve each different type of handle, which there's a lot of different styles that, you know, some of them are going to be more useful for like white water, some are going to be more useful for like paddling in a lake. So this is one of those things, you're probably going to screw it up, but just as cleanly as you can, just try and connect those lines. Again, all of this will be much easier to, you know, visually see and refine once we have, well, you know, once we actually start carving. You know, it's when you have a physical thing, it's much easier to, you know, see what is going wrong with the shape. So we just, right now, we just want to have some kind of lines to follow. So even if they're not perfect, at least they're there. I'm also really bad at doing anything like this kind of work with my hands. Anything with a pencil is just not my forte. So even when I was in school for graphic design, they always wanted me to draw logos before I ever designed them on Illustrator, and I could never create the thing with my hand that I could create with, you know, digital media. So that's one of those things. Is, you know, some people are really good at drawing, and others are not. It doesn't actually. And you know, I always get the questions. You know, aren't you like a creative person? Don't you build stuff with your hands? You know, how come you can't draw the stuff that you build? And it's just like I just don't know how to make my hands move a pencil in the way that I don't know, in the way that I can cut a piece of wood with a saw. I don't know. It's one of those things that's kind of it's a weird thing to think about. Oh yeah, no, so we don't actually have a 1/2 inch handle. It's going to be 1 inch because both sides. So yes, that's more what I was expecting. A 1 inch round handle makes a lot more sense. So I just want to make sure that as I'm sketching this, because we do have some areas where you kind of have to infer the dip yourself. Not all of the points kind of perfectly follow it. They're pretty good, but there's definitely some areas where you kind of have to intuitively figure out the curve, and wow, this is rough. Just trying to get that nice, at least a semi-smooth drawing in there, at least. So just something that will make cutting it with the saw later on a little bit easier. And it's actually not looking too bad. I know at the end I want a pretty heavy corner on there, just so we're not, if we hit it on a rock, it's not going to get destroyed. Maybe I need to sit down and practice my drawing skills. Or at least my connect the dots skills. More of an angle there, closer. I mean, so far it seems like the trick is to just kind of get a flow going, but at the same time, then I say that and then I completely screw that up. go. That gives us at least our blade design. Again, it's a little bit rough, but once we get to actually carving it, we should end up with a much smoother thing, because it's very easy to tell. You know, I don't know how to smooth these lines out nicely just drawing it by hand, but once I actually get to carving this, it should be a lot easier to get a good smooth line on there. Because I mean, I found that with a lot of the other carving stuff I've done, is that when you actually start doing it, it makes a lot more sense than when you're just trying to draw it out. So now we get to move on to actually doing the handle part of this. And I'm just going to take a minute to see if I can get the Canon back up and working, because it definitely, the video from it looks a lot better, and I don't know why it's not cooperating with me at this point. And I mean, if any of you do any kind of live streaming, I would love to hear some advice about what works for you guys, what doesn't work, that kind of thing. Because as I'm sure you can tell, I'm still very, very new to this. And let's see, because hey, there we go. We got the Canon back online. Beautiful. Okay, there we go. Canon cameras are the bane of my existence. I like the only reason that I use my Canon camera, you guys may have noticed this over the last week, that the video has looked quite different, or maybe you've noticed, maybe you haven't, but the video has actually looked quite different from how it normally looks, because before I started doing the daily uploads, I mainly used my Nikon D5500, which has, in my opinion, has a way better image quality to it. The pictures just generally look better, and pictures and video look better. The color is a lot less saturated. The Canon, I can't get my Canon camera to not, oversaturate the colors ridiculously. So, but it's the only reason I'm using the Canon is because it's got autofocus, and when I'm, running around the shop doing all this different stuff, having that quick autofocus that I can focus it on my face, can focus it on all this different stuff, is a little bit more useful. And so I kind of have to compromise on the image quality over having it in focus, and then half the time it doesn't actually focus. So that's my little rant anyway on the Canon cameras. But yeah, that's in case you're wondering why stuff might be looking a little bit different, it's all about which cameras I'm using, because I much prefer the Nikon over the Canon, but I kind of have to use the Canon because it is, well, my only real option. Anyway, let's start working on this handle here. So I'm just trying to find the section of the book that goes over like the different handle shapes. I believe it might be closer to the end. Yeah, there we go. So it gives us these half templates. I don't really think I have a way. Actually, I might be able to transfer it onto a piece of paper. So if I transfer this onto a piece of paper, maybe if I can see it, that should work. So line up our grid line. Then I might be able to use this to transfer it onto the actual board itself. And oh boy, is it going to be rough. That's for sure. Okay, so that didn't actually work out half bad. So we know we have our center line. I'm just going to measure how long this actually is supposed to be. So about 6.5 inches down. then we just have to figure out a way to transfer this onto this with, I don't really want to go through and figure out all the measurements myself. I don't know if that's going to work. If we fold this in half, no, well, maybe actually. So this has been one of the funnest parts about doing like these daily uploads or doing like the live stream like this, is that you guys get to see a lot more of the fumbling around that happens. It's not always perfect, like fun and games and that in the shop. I definitely, in a lot of my videos, I think people get kind of a false impression that everything kind of runs smoothly or only certain things go very, very wrong. But it's like, in reality, it's on a daily basis where I'm working on something and things just start kind of going crazy. So even as something as, the video that you guys will see on Monday, which was yesterday's video, or I recorded it yesterday, that was a interesting time. I thought it was going to be a much simpler day. Turned out to be much more complex. Didn't make for as good of a video. Not that I want to say that my videos are bad, but yeah, it's probably not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But but the interesting thing about it is that it's a view into the shop that I think you don't normally get from a lot of YouTubers. A lot of people are very, everyone wants to put their best foot forward on YouTube. A lot of your big name woodworkers, all they show is kind of the perfect side of the woodworking. They'll usually do like Q&As being like, oh yeah, not everything I do is perfect, but they never actually show it. I think for me, it's one of those things where it's like, I think it's very interesting to kind of show yourself as being the clown, I guess. So you kind of it's okay to screw up. I screw up on a daily basis when I'm in the wood shop, stuff like that. So it's one of those things, if you're new to woodworking, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be like these big name woodworkers that, oh, well, they don't screw up. They don't ever have to throw away $200 in wood because they did something wrong. For me, I want to actually show like the daily, what goes wrong on a daily basis. Because some days everything flows smoothly. So other days absolutely everything goes completely wrong. And oh, I really have no idea how to transfer this. So. Okay, so we know at the bottom here that we're going to be, so we can take some of our starting points anyway. So we know that we need a 1/2 inch out from our bottom mark here. That's a little ways down. And then at our widest point, so the trick is just kind of keeping everything lined up here, because then we can transfer it over. So from here, we're 1 3/4. See, this is one of those times where it's like, hey, maybe I do know what I'm doing. One and a half. Okay, yeah, so we're actually getting pretty close. So once we get it on one side, then we should be able to fairly easily mirror it on the other side. I'm hoping anyway. So really all I'm doing here, I'm just trying to find points where they are a nice, I should actually use the ruler properly, but I'm just trying to find points where they actually line up on a tick here. And I'm using the 16ths for the measurements that I'm working on right now, purely because 16ths are a lot easier to read compared to the 30 seconds. And again, I know for a fact that, from the last time I made a paddle that at this stage, there really isn't anything that is set in stone. Everything you touch later on is going to change and affect the overall, once you actually start carving, everything here is going to change. so that gives us at least one side of our handle kind of done. Definitely going to take some refinement, but then, you know, definitely a flatter curve up top there. So now we'll just transfer these measurements over to the other side, and then we should have, again, like I said, a mostly accurate handle shape that we can then work on refining once we actually get to the stages of carving things. Okay, so they're a little lopsided. Might actually work on refining that, because our first one was a little bit more closer to what we actually want, whereas this one is a little bit, just needs a little bit of sandpaper. Sandpaper makes a great eraser for when you're, especially when you're just working on some layout lines like this. So we want to definitely be on a little bit of a straighter taper up here. Yeah, that's too narrow. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. So it'll get more refined once we actually. I might actually change this side a little bit more. Just so it matches a little bit better, because I like what's going on more. I like what's going on the side that we just did more than the first side. So it's a little bit of a smoother curve, whereas the first side we did is a little bit of a sharper curve. So overall, yeah, I think that's going to be pretty good. That should give you a good handle on the side there. And then we just want to connect our lines from the blade all the way up to the handle. There we go. Now we have a paddle that is fully drawn out. We know exactly where everything's going to be. That is going to be a fully functional paddle at some point in time. And the important thing here, we're just going to double check that our grain is still running pretty straight through it. One of the things I have that's kind of interesting that I've learned about grain after doing some like splitting of wood to get straighter grain is that even if the grain here looks like it is curving and doing all that kind of stuff, it might not actually be, because that's just, you know, it's this really weird thing. I don't really know how to explain it other than you kind of just got to go with your gut. And like I said, this is the first paddle I've done in a long time. This is the first solid one I've done. The other paddle that I carved before, I glued up a whole bunch of pieces. So that's just kind of inherently stronger because you have that glue in there that's helping to hold everything together. Whereas here we're relying fully on just the strength of the wood. So that 1-inch round shaft in the middle there, that, you know, this whole center shaft here should be plenty strong, you know, basically no matter what we, you know, even if the grain is not perfect through here. But yeah, overall this should be fairly straight enough to give us a good, strong shaft in the middle here. And of course, if this paddle breaks the first time I use it, or the 10th time I use it, it's one of those things. It's a good learning lesson. It's one, I may need to make 100 paddles before I ever figure out how to actually make a good one. That's why I'm nowhere near jumping into selling a canoe paddle or anything like that. I just want to try making them because they seem like a cool thing to take the time to carve and make. Like I said at the beginning, they are one of the few. They're one of the few things in woodworking that you still really only ever need to use hand tools for. Now I'm going to be doing it quite differently than a lot of the traditional paddle carvers do. A lot of them say you would take a blank like this and just start hacking away at this with a hatchet, which I might try to do. But I feel like using my coping saw to just follow my lines is going to be a lot easier. I think anyway, because we can just that's exactly what I would do if I was to use the bandsaw. I'd just throw a 1/4 inch blade in the bandsaw, follow my lines here, and we would be done in 5 minutes. But I'm going to torture myself next week anyway, and just try and clear out as much of this waste anyway as I can with the fret saw, so that hopefully when we actually come time to just gotta make sure we're okay. Sorry, I have to check all the different devices, make sure everything is still. Okay. Trust the viewers. Trust what they say. Feedback is better than nothing. All right. Well, thank you for adding that into the chat. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if that's telling me that because there's very few viewers on this live stream that is what I should take from this. But thank you. I do appreciate some interaction, I guess. Anyway, yeah, so like I was saying, we're going to get to actually cutting this out and starting to carve it next week. I don't think that this will actually be that long of a project. Again, this whole live stream thing is kind of an experiment just to see how it goes. Clearly off of this one, I don't know if people are all that interested in it. We'll have to see. I'll do some, I'll play around with it a little bit more. I might do it for a couple more weeks, just kind of see what people think. But yeah, I was expecting a few more people to show up for this live stream, so we'll have to see, how it goes in the future. Maybe everyone's just busy today. I don't know. It's a long weekend here in Canada. I know that at least, so that might have something to do with it. But I am going to end the live stream here because we've kind of done everything I was planning to do today. So if you guys are still watching, I do hope you enjoyed the live stream. Make sure you check out the video that's going to be coming out tomorrow about the king-size bed frame that I'm working on. It should be pretty interesting. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one.